So good morning. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Donito Burgess. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at Tucson Bird Alliance. I'm joined by my colleagues Jennie MacFarland, our Director of Bird Conservation, and Olya Weekley, our Applied Conservation Program Manager. If you've ever gone birding with us or come to our virtual events, you know that we start all of our events the exact same way, and it's about telling you why we do what we do. Our mission is quite simple. We're here to inspire people to protect and enjoy birds. We do that through recreation, education, conservation, and restoration of the habitat upon which we all depend. So today we're going to kind of focus on that educational part of it. Jenny and Olya have been doing some really incredible work with some of the desert purple martins. I'm excited to hear about it. I'm in the same boat you are. This is going to be new information for me. So I hope you guys enjoy getting kind of a look behind the curtain and seeing some of the newest science and newest information that we have coming out. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it. Oh, sorry, y'all, real quick too. If you have a question, you can either put that in the chat and I will be monitoring that. Or if you'd like, you can just hold it till the end. And then Jenny and Olyo will answer a few questions at the end if you'd like to do it that way. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jenny. Go ahead, Jenny, take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay, Danilo?
I can hear you wonderfully.
All right, cool. Got my little microphone. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, desert purple martins. I need to actually move this over here. Okay, share. Okay, hang on. Actually, let me make sure I shared it right, like we were just talking about. Okay, yep, sound is on. Okay. Well, hello. So we're going to be talking about desert purple martins, which are the star birds of the saguaro forest. And okay, so this right here is a desert purple martin on this main photo here, and they're really interesting birds. So the main thought behind this talk between Olya and myself was to try to introduce desert purple martins to all of you so that we can then later on talk a little more sort of in detail about specific aspects of the larger desert purple martin project. So what even is the desert purple martin project? Okay, there we go. So this is a really interesting project that we began in 2020 in at Tucson Bird Alliance. And the main focus was to explore the third subspecies of purple martin. So purple martins as a species, it's all one species in North America, purple martin, and it has three distinctive subspecies. And the most famous one, I would say nationally, the most famous one in the United States is the eastern purple martin. So this is that beloved bird of people's backyards where they hang up these flotillas of gourds, or they'll put up, like a giant condominium birdhouse with like 50 different slots in it, little tiny individual birdhouses inside. And you get these large groups of purple martins that will communally nest in people's yards. And this is incredibly popular situation where you will have people who are not bird watchers at all that are totally into purple martins. They call themselves purple martin landlords. They're a very well-known, famous bird, especially in the East and the Midwest. But there are actually two other distinct identified subspecies of purple martin. The second is what we call the forest purple martin, but it's the arboricola subspecies. And you can see it here on the map in the western part of the US. They're real patchy in their breeding distribution. This orange colors are the breeding distribution. They're very patchy and they're really limited to forest, as the subspecies name implies, and they will nest in woodpecker cavities within existing trees. They will also sometimes use nest boxes, especially like sort of in the Pacific Northwest area. And they are all along sort of the Pacific coast, parts of California, Colorado, Utah, and you can get them in Arizona as well. If you ever see purple martins in Flagstaff or like the Show Low area, anywhere above the Mogollon Rim, up in the pine aspen forest, those are the forest purple martins, the arboricola. But then there's a third subspecies, and it's the least studied, the least known, and also the smallest breeding range of all three. And that's this one right here, the Hesperia, or the desert purple martin. And they're limited to southeast Arizona, parts of Sonora, and Baja. And that is it for their entire breeding range. It's a very, very limited range. And you can see here in the photo, that it's a purple martin looking out of a hole in a saguaro cactus that was made originally by a woodpecker for its own nesting uses, but has now been taken over by a desert purple martin. And these are Sonoran desert birds. They have a fascinating breeding and life cycle, and this is very typical sort of habitat where you would find them. It is Sonoran desert habitat. It is monsoon timed, and it's a particular part of Sonoran Desert, which we'll talk about. So here's a really cool map from eBird. eBird does these migration animated maps, and these are really neat. And so how this is working is this bar moves across the year here, and I'm going to restart it again in a second, but this bar is going to go through the year, January through December, and then we'll watch the animation of where purple martins are located in each of those months. So it's going to start in Brazil because that's where they winter. All right, so let's start this again. So January they're in Brazil. The eastern birds flood through the east and then by May, June, they're coming into Arizona and then into California. So you can really see how much more widespread the birds are in the eastern part of the US, the eastern subspecies, and how much later the Arizona birds and the California, Pacific Northwest birds come. The Arizona birds are the last ones to come in for breeding. So they're in a very different distribution, very different habitat type, but also just very different timing. And that's really important. These are birds of the monsoon. So here's a cute video of a mama purple martin bringing in food. It's a very hungry baby, like almost ready to fledge, and then mama bringing in a bug. But this map on the right here is very interesting. So what this is showing is the orange coloration. The areas that are shaded orange is the footprint of the Sonoran Desert for the world. The entire Sonoran Desert fits within this map here. It's all within Arizona, Sonora, a little bit into California, and then Baja. And the little green icons, these are where this is the range of saguaros. Come on, go to the next one. But what's going Okay. But we get martins in the Tucson area, down in this part of Sonora, and then parts of Baja. So if there are no saguaros in those areas, what are the birds nesting in? And the answer is cardones. So there is another type of large columnar cactus that the desert purple martins will use for nesting. And they're these really cool cacti. They're called cardones, and they look a lot like saguaros. So you can see here this photo on the left, and they're very, very large. They look to me like if a saguaro and an organ pipe merged into one large cactus. They're very similar. They are closely related to saguaros, but they branch out closer to the base and they can be larger than saguaros. They're very interesting cactus. But you get the same sort of woodpeckers down in the parts of Sonora and Baja where cardones occur, gilded flickers and Gila woodpeckers, and they also make nesting holes in those cardones, and the purple martins will use them as well. And so these are some photos on the right that I got from eBird of where a birder had taken photos of martins hanging out on cardones, just like they do on the saguaros up here around Tucson. So when we launched this project in 2020, the timing was interesting. It was a rough year for a lot of reasons, but it was also a very dry year. But it was really an interesting opportunity for Olya and I to go out in 2020 in the summer and try to figure out how to logistically do this. We wanted to study desert purple martins. We wanted to see inside their nests because very little work had been done on the actual nesting cycle of desert purple martins. They're very unusual in that they nest in the Sonoran Desert in the middle of summer because these birds don't even lay eggs until July. It's very unusual. Nearly all the other desert birds are nesting in the spring. These guys are monsoon tide and they're in the desert, the Saguaro Desert. So we had to figure out how to look inside their nests. All the research that's done on the eastern martins, which is extensive, is aided by the fact that they're doing it in nest boxes. They can lower those nest boxes down, open the little door, and look inside and see what the chicks look like. That's obviously not an option for us. So we worked out this method of using little wireless endoscope cameras that connect to your smartphone and show you what the camera is seeing in real time on your phone. And these long extending poles, these like utility poles that I think they're meant for like dusting a ceiling or like changing a light bulb, these like utility poles that we took out into the desert and figured out a method. And there's Olya on the left doing it with a video, and figured out how to see inside purple martin nests in the desert inside a saguaro cavity. And it's just been one of the most fun things I've done. And this is a little video showing what an endoscope sees inside a purple martin nest. The martins are upset because I'm there about to scope this nest. And you look inside, this is what the camera is seeing on the top of that pole. There's Mama with eggs. And this was July 22nd, 2020. She's got a few leaves in there. And then after she took off, I checked again just to see if there was 3 eggs. And then I went back on August 6th, 3 little chicks. And then I came back on the 17th, and the 3 are still in there. It's hard to see the third one. He's in the back. He's being used as like a pillow by his other sibling. But the 3 were still in there, getting just bigger, being fed by Mama and Daddy. I think that's the end. Yeah, and then when I went back again later, the nest was empty, like the young had fledged. And that was pretty great. And how we were utilizing all these videos and images that we were getting from peeking inside of these saguaro cavity nests was using data that had been gathered by our partners, Purple Martin Conservation Association out of Pennsylvania, and they've done extensive work on eastern purple martins and have been really good partners in this project, where because their purple martins are in nest boxes on a flagpole that can be lowered down, they were taking, they have this whole database where they have photos of chicks at every day of their development. So we were using this information that PMCA had gathered with their help. And then we were trying to figure out in our photos of the inside of the nest, we were seeing how old these chicks were so that we could work out a timeline of when the eggs were laid and when they fledged and that sort of information, which was really very lacking. So this is the sort of guide we were using. And this is some examples of photos we got from inside of saguaros showing the different stages of these developing desert purple martins. So this is the first stage that when we do our data sheets, this is a category, all the different categories you can choose. So nest building is a category. They do put leaves, stems of grass, little sticks inside the nest cavity as they prepare to lay eggs. So here's a young male on the left photo gathering some leaves from an ocotillo, and then inside of a cavity, a nest with leaves, but no eggs yet. The next category we see is eggs present, and they're beautiful, pure white eggs. They're pretty much always on this bed of leaves with little bits of sticks and twigs and grass. And one time I found like a water bottle wrapper inside the nest, but they do put some material down. And this is like what you see in the east as well, inside those gourd nests. So they put some stuff down, then they lay eggs. We keep track in our database of how many eggs we see in these photos. Now, when I see eggs in a nest, when I look inside with my camera, I don't really know when those eggs were laid because the incubation period is 15 to 18 days, so that I could be seeing them on the first day they were laid, or maybe they're about to hatch. So when we find this, we do go back and look again, because once we get a view of the chicks, then we can sort of figure out the whole timeline. So this is what the chicks look like on day
Why is
1 to
this not
5.
connecting?
They're featherless. They have transparent skin, and their eyes are not open. And then day 6 to 9, they look like this. They have feather sheaths. And what this means is you can see like little pins almost growing out of their skin. And you see this a lot with developing birds where it's feather sheaths. So it's like almost like a little tube of feathers that grows out of the skin, and then it'll sort of crack open and you get like a poof of multiple feathers will open from that sheath. It's a pretty common thing you see in baby birds. And then this is great because you got 2 chicks that look pretty much the same size, and then one that looks a little younger than the other 2. And we see this a fair amount. And then day 20 to 26, they're oh, I'm missing one. Feather sheets emerging. And then I have one in the middle, sorry, where they're a little more covered in feathers. And then day 20 to 26, they're fully feathered. And this is when they start to look like actual little purple martins. And then there's the fledging phase. And we do run across this, especially towards the end of the season, obviously, when we're out and about. You see the young, they're out of the nest, but they are still very dependent on the parents, and they tend to stay together and they tend to stay very nearby their nesting saguaro. So here's three chicks and daddy coming with some food for them, sitting literally on the saguaro that they were raised in, sitting on top of that same saguaro. And this photo on the right, they're sitting on a cross beam of a telephone pole. And I see that a lot. They seem to sit on those a lot or on the wires themselves. And if you ever see this yourself, usually mid to late August, towards the end of the breeding season, that you can tell them sitting up there often with the parents, and you can tell it's the young fledglings because they have little tiny short tails. Once Joe from PMCA pointed that out to me, it's actually pretty obvious. They have little, much shorter tails than their parents, than the adults. Okay, so we started taking all these photos and videos we got of purple martins and categorizing them into these categories. And it was really interesting to see two things. One, it did follow a pretty clear pattern of most of the egg laying happening early to mid July was most of the egg laying. And then it followed a normal progression with then most of the fledglings happening um, late, mid to late August. So it really followed a clear pattern. But what's really interesting to note too was there was quite a lot of variance as well. There was a lot of outliers. We had nests with eggs present as late as mid-August. And then comparing notes with the people who research the Eastern martins, this does happen in the East as well, and it tends to be the younger martins, like maybe ones that were only a year old that are trying to nest, and they tend to do it later than the more experienced older adults. So just really interesting stuff, and this had not been really no investigative work like this had really been done on the desert purple martins. So a big thing we were also doing as part of this project, and we continue to work on, is trying to find the nesting saguaros of these desert purple martins. They are very patchy. They're not evenly distributed. Um, they it's weird because there will be patches of Sonoran Desert I'll be walking through that looks excellent, and there's no purple martins nesting in the area. And then I'll get to another part to me that looks just as good, excellent, and there will be a colony of purple martins there. So finding the nesting saguaro seems to be like 80% of what happens here. 80% of the effort goes into finding those exact nesting saguaros. They do tend to be quite loyal to them. They will use them year after year, or like a nesting saguaro will get used over and over again. Not always every year. We have seen gaps. Sometimes a saguaro won't be used, and then the next year it gets used, that kind of thing. But very often they get used multiple times, which is just really interesting to see. And so if you know of any nesting saguaros where purple martins tend to be there in the summer, please do let us know. And we're going to also have a lot of volunteer opportunities to help with this next summer if anyone's interested. Okay. So I just want to talk briefly on some of the migration work that we've been doing with desert purple martins. And this project began in 2020. So 2020 and 2021, we did a lot of just trying to figure this out. And then in 2021, get volunteers involved, and we're all scoping and getting this sort of baseline information of when do these birds lay eggs? When do these birds fledge kind of information. But then in 2022, we kicked it up a notch. We were partnering with PMCA, Purple Martin Conservation Association out of Pennsylvania, and that's Joe in the center photo there, who's the head of PMCA. And we really wanted to help with this effort to try to understand what's going on with the migration of these birds, because this was completely unknown. There was no one knew where desert purple martins, like the route they took to the south. I mean, we assume they went to South America like the other martins do for the winter, but we had no idea exactly where they spent the winter or what route they took. And this was like so well studied in the eastern martins and not at all in the desert martins. So purple martins. So did we partnered up with PMCA, and we attempted in 2022 to try to catch some desert purple martins, and it was not easy. It was not easy at all. This was a very difficult thing to do, and you can see from the photo there in the bottom, though, that that's a desert martin. We did catch one. And for this first year of this work, we used GPS trackers, which are very small, and they're also not that expensive. They're in the sort of $200 range device. But the only thing about these trackers is it does take what's sort of like a GPS coordinate every day, but the only way to get the data off is to recatch the bird. So because of that, we wanted to catch purple martins at a nesting saguaro in the hope that the bird would return to that same saguaro so we could get the device off of the purple martin and download the data when it returned the following year. It was I could see a million things that could go wrong with this, but we tried it. So in 2022, we caught a few birds. I think it was eight. We caught eight birds and put trackers on them. And then we had to wait. And in June of 2023, hoping that one of these birds would come back to the same saguaro, the exact same saguaro, I was hanging out at one of the saguaros where we caught most of the birds. And I'm watching, and there he was. A male had returned. He's got the silver band on his leg and the purple on his other leg. And you can see the tracker on his lower back right here. He had gone all the way to the wintering ground and all the way back to, this was in Sahuarita, to a big saguaro in Sahuarita and was hanging out on top of the exact same saguaro where he had been captured the year before. This was unbelievable. I was so excited. We got great photos of him. And this was in June of 2023. But all we had to do now was catch him. We just had to get him and get that tracker off of him. And this turned out to be so difficult. This bird was not stupid. He had been caught the previous year. He was on to us. It was pretty frustrating. We could see him a lot sitting on the telephone wires or sitting on top of the saguaro, and it was so hard to catch. This was so hard. We worked on this for weeks and months. So this is Tori, a graduate student we work with a lot up at NAU, who's part of this project. And she was out there like every morning with her little net on a pole because we knew what nesting hole he was using. And she was just like waiting for him to go into the hole so she could put the net over it. That never did work. I don't think we ever caught a single bird that way, but we tried it. And then we got more people to help us, and we do these mist nets right next to the nesting saguaro, kind of right near the nesting cavity he was using. Meanwhile, we're catching other birds and putting trackers on them, but we could not get this adult male that had the tracker. And then we finally got it. It was during the week of the festival of 2023. We finally caught him. It was an unbelievable moment. He flew into the net. We got him down, got that tracker off his little back, and then let him go. It's like, we're trying to help you, Martin. Fly into the net. We'll get the tracker off of you. And we finally got it off. And this was the initial data download pass. The way these GPS trackers work, they use the angle of the sun as part of their data input. So things like the equinox really throw them off. So this is a kind of rough look at just raw data coming in on this bird, but it does show that the bird went through Central America and then all the way to eastern Brazil. So this was the very first glance any scientist ever has had of where a desert purple martin travels to in the winter. And this is a more refined map where the data points that were erroneous from like the equinox have been thrown out. And it's interesting because you can see that this bird in 2022 went down through Mexico, through Central America, and then to eastern Brazil. Before this data was downloaded, all the researchers who were involved were kind of taking bets on where we thought the martins would be. And a lot of people were guessing not even Brazil. Okay, so we had no idea. It does turn out to be Brazil. It's considerably further east than the eastern martins winter. The eastern martins winter here in the Amazon basin, but our western birds went further east than the eastern martins did to a drier part of Brazil and spent the winter there. And then they came back up north. At least this individual bird did. It's very interesting. This was an amazing discovery. It was such a moment to get that device off that bird and then download it. So then in 2024, we kicked it up another notch where we wanted to use satellite trackers. So these are much more expensive devices that are in the $2,000 a piece range. And the benefit, though, is that this device will tell you in real time where the bird is. Multiple times a day, it uploads information to satellites and then tells you the location of whatever is wearing that device. And the technology had finally gotten good enough where these were small enough now to put on a bird like a purple martin. So that also means we didn't have to recapture the bird, so we could catch it not at a nesting saguaro, but anywhere. So this is an area near San Manuel that I knew about that is a very large evening gathering point for purple martins because it's right along the San Pedro River. They like to hang out on these wires, and they will fly over here to the right because there's a big pond over here next to the river. So here's a map of where we were. This is San Manuel to the south. And this is a big pond along this channel here, which is the San Pedro River. So this is a beloved place for purple martins. And then there's saguaro uplands on either side of the riparian zone. So it's like a perfect place for the desert martins. They nest up in the saguaros. They come down to the river to forage for their favorite food, which is like dragonflies and damselflies. And they have this pond that they can utilize for like bathing and drinking, like all the swallows do. So we set up nets. Again, this was tricky. These birds are very good flyers. I mean, they're like jet fighters. They're catching dragonflies on the wing. They're excellent flyers. They have excellent vision, and it's really hard to like pull a fast one on them. They see the nets. They were even doing things like sitting on top of the nets and looking at us, which was really annoying, but hilarious, but annoying. But then sometimes they would fight and stuff, and then they wouldn't be paying attention, and they'd fly into the nets. So we did catch a few, and we put this is what the devices look like. These low tech, which is a company out of New Zealand, satellite trackers on these desert martins. And this was the first time this had ever been done. And here's a photo of a female with her tracker on her back. And this was some of the first data we got. We ended up getting three birds. And we put, this is a young male, that one we caught by the river, by the San Pedro River. And he was going all over the place because it seemed like he did not nest the year we caught him. He was a young adult male, not fully developed yet, didn't have his full colors yet. But then we also caught two females in Saurita, and all three of them were sending data initially. And this was the young male is now in red. He went down to Sinaloa pretty early, and then was spending time over in Baja. And this was just unbelievable. I was like checking this like multiple times a day on my computer to see where the birds were. It's absolutely fascinating to see everywhere they're pinging, and then the software from the company sort of makes straight lines between the pings. But he was just went across the Gulf of California and then over to Baja and was just and then came back over to Sinaloa. And this was one of the females came down to the exact same spot. And this seems to be a very important stopover site for migrating purple martins. And so here's just one of the maps that was generated where you can see now the colors are always changing in this mapping thing. One female's device stopped working. She pulled the antenna out pretty early, but one of the females made it all the way, and she's purple in this map, made it all the way down to Colombia, and then unfortunately stopped sending signal. We think she had trouble crossing the Andes there, and then, but the young male made it all the way, went all along coastal Mexico, through Central America, through Costa Rica, all the way down. He went north to avoid the large mountains, and then came down through Venezuela, went into the Amazon, and just kept going. He went through the Amazon basin and was like, bye, and then just kept going east and made a very similar situation to that very first map we saw, where he was in this part of Brazil and then went further east for the rest of the winter. Absolutely groundbreaking stuff. This was really cool. And this is a map from January of this year, of 2025. And we wanted to do more work this year with trackers, and there will be more discussion of that in my next talk. But that's also going to be fun too. But another thing I just want to touch on briefly is, because you may have heard of this, was this discovery we did of the big roost. So this is a thing that happens in eastern martins as well, where especially right before migration, purple martins will sort of gather at a good spot, a spot they've sort of like almost like chosen as a group, and they tend to be pretty loyal to them. And I'd been looking for a big roost spot for a long time. I had heard of previous ones that had been found in other parts of the city that were not active anymore, and like in the past. There was a good write-up from one like in the 1950s that was along the Rito and then was along the Pantano Wash. And so I knew that there must be one around. We just didn't know where it was. One of the females with a tracker on it, her data points did help us find it. It revealed it to us almost, where and it turned out to be in Saurita, right on the where the red pin is here. This is on Continental Road, just south of where Nogales Highway connects with Continental Road. So it's kind of southern Saurita, right by the Green Valley water treatment plant. If you're familiar with that site, it's just a little bit to the north of there. And looking east into these pecan groves turned out to be a major mega roost of desert purple martins. So in 2024, late in the season, sort of late August into early September, we went down there and we found a big roost site. So this is just thousands of martins spiraling down into the pecan trees. And it's only about a half-hour window where you see them flying around and foraging, and then they tunnel down into, they just sort of spiral down together into the trees to spend the night. And they're very social birds. So you see this a lot with purple martins where they'll roost together in a big group. So this summer in 2025, we went out again. We're watching for it, looking for the mega roost of purple martins again. And this is a good photo. You can see the little individual birds coming, kind of streaming in for the evening roost. And we held purple martin roost watch parties. We did, I think, 4 evenings of this, very late August after the festival this year. And this is the site in southern Sahuarita. Those homes behind us luckily, turn out to be have very, very nice families living in them who were interested in what we were doing, and we showed them the martins and all that. So they were okay. They were very much okay with us hanging out right in front of their house, looking at purple martins for 4 evenings in a row. But I am planning on doing these events again um, this coming year. The birds don't even get back until May, but we'll be doing this. So stay tuned for that if you're around in Southeast Arizona, May through the end of August at any time. We will be having these watch parties again throughout the season, is what I'm thinking, so we can all enjoy the spectacle of watching just hundreds and thousands of martins go down to roost. All right, so I'm going to pass this off to Olya now.
Thanks, Jenny. Um, so as Jenny touched on, martins obviously really love our saguaros, and a lot of other secondary cavity nesters also like saguaros for their cavities. They're actually one of the main cavity providers around here. They're easier to excavate. We've got the woodpeckers that will excavate the holes. They're the only ones that can do that. They have the hardware to excavate those cavities. And then they either use them themselves or they abandon them, and then they're available for other species to use. And as you can imagine, that creates a lot of competition among those species. And an additional stressor on this competition is that saguaros are suffering from wildfires fueled by invasive species and development. There's also been pretty poor recruitment of new baby saguaros. It's been about over 24 years since the last time we had the perfect conditions for a saguaro seedling to establish from seed in the wild. So as you can imagine, the numbers are dwindling. It can take anywhere between 100 and 150 years for a saguaro to achieve the size necessary to host desert purple martins. Our martins love the very tall, very big, mature, multi-armed saguaros. And unlike their eastern counterparts, desert martins are not documented to use nest boxes. But we know that a suitable nest box design that does meet the special needs of the desert living, of the desert martins, it would be a beneficial conservation tool, just like nest boxes have been used for bluebirds in creation of bluebird trails, where they were brought back from very dwindling numbers as well. And so we would plan to use that tool to bridge the gap between the time that we plant a baby saguaro to the time that it gets big enough for a cavity nester to use it. Years of collecting data on purple martins' nest dimensions and their preferences kind of all culminated in the nest box design challenge. And in 2022, we launched a multinational contest to kind of crowdsource ideas for a nest box design that could mimic the properties of a saguaro cavity used by purple martins. We based the competition on a few guidelines. We provided the measurements that we collected in the field. Specifically, the opening had to be between 2 and 3.5 inches in diameter. drop or the space between the hole and the bottom of the box is 7 to 11 inches from our measurements. And then finally, the internal dimensions of the volume, basically the floor of the cavity is between 5.5 to 6.2 inches in diameter. Average outside temperatures during their nesting season, which is again during our monsoon season, those temperatures vary from daytime highs of 95 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit to overnight lows of 70 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. On average, what we found by putting little temperature gauges inside the cavities is that a saguaro cavity buffers daily minimum and maximum temperatures in the summer by 6 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So the designs had to be very well insulated to achieve a similar effect. Other things that we told the citizen scientists to consider is that the box is going to be out in monsoon rains and high winds and harsh sun. So the materials that they used had to be durable, but affordable and easy to install. So a few factors there to consider. We ended up receiving 22 very strong submissions. We evaluated the plans for the requirements that we provided, like the dimensions, and also for again that durability, that feasibility, and for of course cost effectiveness. Pictured here are a subset of prototypes that moved on to the next stage of our experiment, which was having those prototypes, putting them out into the field and measuring their temperature during the hottest part of this was in May that we were testing these, and to compare them to the saguaro cavity and the ambient temperature and see how those compare. And alongside the prototypes that were submitted to us, we also tested some of typical designs. So we had a metal box from what they use in the East, where they don't have to deal with some of the high temperatures like we do here. We also tested a typical bluebird style nest box that's just pine. And of course, a gourd, where they're also popular in the East. None of the designs were identical to a saguaro cavity, but we sort of kind of almost expected some variation. It's very hard to mimic the living flesh of a cactus, but three designs came the closest, and those are the top right of the slide here. They all share a common feature, but they all use different materials. So they are in order of performance, and then the bottom right is our winner that had the number one performing nest box design. That's Greg Corman. His design featured an air duct, a metal air duct, and inside was um, a wooden box, and then on the in between spaces is the insulation. So the fluffy stuff that you see inside houses for insulating properties. And then similarly, the other designs also had that two-chamber design where you had the internal nesting structure and then the external box, and they're separated by inches of insulation. We had our top 9 participants. They did receive a cash prize that was sponsored by a donor. And we also, in the top left here, are the 3 top performing Nestbox designers from the youth category. And on the bottom there is my field testing uh, where we had nest boxes with temperature gauges measuring temperature in the boxes and then as well in the cavity that's in the saguaro right behind me. Then we had our top 3 performing nest box designs move to the next stage, which is actually putting them out and having Purple Martins tell us which nest boxes they prefer. So we had a lot of work cut out for us. We had to recreate 25 sets of these three designs. So that's 75 boxes of uh, total. And we coated them in white elastomeric roof paint so that it seals the cracks and also reflects the sun. And some of you might say, well, these don't really look like saguaros. And what we were thinking is like, that's okay. The birds really hone in on the cavity itself and also that it will be above ground at a height that they prefer. So which is 15 to 25 feet off the ground. And we actually had to come up with a way to make a freestanding structure that would hold up in their elements, like I said, those high winds, those rains, and everything else. And we created this 16-foot structure where it has the main boom and four supporting legs that are then rebarred into the ground. And that way it is fully supported, even in the wind, even in the crazy monsoonal storms that we've had. And so it takes about 2 to 3 people to fully install one of these. As you can see, there's four, and I'm mostly standing around there. But um, it is a very interesting way. I'm going to restart it here if I can. Um, the way we do it is we make a pulley system on a pivot. There is a stand on the bottom that we pivot the main boom up. Then we use a level to make sure everything is fully aligned. And then finally put in the leg supports. So in 2023, we installed 25 of these. They were in or near existing martin colonies, breeding colonies, so that we had the highest chance of our nest boxes getting noticed by the purple martins. So it was a mix of private properties, people's backyards that abutted martin breeding colonies, or also agency properties like the Cap Canal and the Pima County properties that have partnered with us on this project. We really weren't expecting for much to happen right at the beginning because we did put them up in the fall. So we weren't really expecting the first season to have any martin activity. By then, they have long left the Tucson area. But we did have some fun activity that we were able to record with a camera that we pointed at the nest box array at the Mason Center here. And we started noticing a very curious Gila woodpecker, which is not unusual. They'll land on things that stand out to them and they inspect them and they may drum on them and then they fly off. But we soon realized that the woodpeckers would disappear inside the nest boxes and then they would pop up in the morning. So in this video, you will see that it is a little bit more than an inspection. It's a full roost where he or she spent the whole night in this very nice cozy nest box, fully to himself, and then in the morning he was ready to take on the day. So that was an early encouraging result of our nest box effort there. And since then, we've had several interesting nesting observations. None of them have been purple martins yet, that's spoiler, but we did have other cavity nesters using our nest boxes. And I think we have some guesses why. And I hope that I've piqued your interest here because this is the end of my nest box presentation for today. But we will be following up with more in-depth examination of two topics that we touched on here, the nest box one and the data, all the tracker data that we also mentioned here. So tune in. We're going to advertise our next installations of the presentations here. So we do hope that you can join us. The links will also be provided in the follow-up email with the recording of this presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny.
Hold on, Jenny. You got to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Um, So we will be expanding this work in future years. We have partners in Mexico and Brazil that we'll be expanding this work to work with them to do more work. We'd like to look at the entire breeding range, which means you have to work in Mexico. And we also are partnering with Tori up at Northern Arizona University, and she is doing a lot of DNA work on these birds to see if their genetics are significantly different from the eastern and the forest purple martins. So we'll have more information on that soon. Tori is actually doing a lot of that lab work actually right now this semester, so that'll be really interesting and growing our Mexican partnerships. We also have a Southwest Border Region Protection Program grant, which is a National Park Service program that does grants specifically for cross-border work. And so we have that has been awarded and survived the Doge process. And now we will be, that work will be happening through 2027 with that grant. So we have some funding, additional funding as well to try to expand this project as well as get resources to our Mexican partners so they can also get data on these birds. And as Olya mentioned, come on, go to the next slide. We have our upcoming talks, and we have scheduled those. So January 8th, Olya will be doing a talk on building homes for desert purple martins. And then on January 13th, I will be doing one on a little more detail on the data. So diving into the data, I've decided to call it. And it will focus on nesting data in more fine detail, as well as migration data. So the links to sign up for those talks will be in the follow-up email that comes after this talk with the recording. And we will happily take questions.
Jenny, I don't know if anybody's going to have any questions, but I don't know how many people are monitoring the chat. So would you mind just repeating what Stephen Vaughn's question was and the answer
Oh,
that you
Stephen.
gave it to him so everybody can see it?
Yes. So Steve asked a great question. Thank you, Stephen. That do the martins have a preference for the smaller Gila woodpecker cavities or the larger flicker cavities? So I did answer in the chat, but let's talk about it. That is something we were definitely wondering about and we're investigating when we were measuring cavities for that nest box project where we wanted to do the contest for people to submit their own designs. So we measured both openings, as Olya showed with the rulers, but we also did some depths as well, where I would lower a weight from the pole on fishing line and see how far down it went before it bottomed out. So we did both, and from those measurements, we could tell that they were using both Gila woodpecker and gilded flicker cavities just by the size, because Gila woodpeckers are smaller than gilded flickers, so their cavity openings as well as the depths are smaller. So I haven't measured the data that I haven't like organized it that way, but I will for my next talk. It's a good point. But we did look at it right when we were doing that nest box recommendations, and there was definitely both. There seemed to be more of the cavities that the martins were using were in the Gila woodpecker holes, but that's also a more abundant woodpecker. So there's going to be more cavities that were made by Gila woodpeckers, but they definitely use both.
And then Steve followed that up with, do they have a preference for the direction the cavity is facing?
Yes, and we'll talk about this in my more detailed data talk, but they definitely, when we looked at the data, we saw that we had them, first of all, we had them in every compass direction, which is really interesting. All the compass directions were represented in the data set, but it's like something like over 75% of them had some sort of westerly exposure, which is the opposite of what we thought, because we usually encourage nest boxes to be placed with an eastern exposure so that they stay cooler in the afternoon. But the vast majority had either sort of like, northwest all the way down to southwest sort of exposure. But then I found a paper talking about Gila woodpecker nest preference from someone who was studying Gila woodpeckers, and woodpeckers have a western preference for making their cavities. So the purple martins can only take what they find. They don't get to make the cavities. So they have to um, use what they find. And the Gilas prefer a western exposure. But you have to remember the Gila woodpeckers nest in the spring. These are not summer nesters. So these are nests that were made for a spring nesting woodpecker that are then being utilized by summer nesting martins. So maybe in the spring, having a western exposure is better so that they're warmed for the night. So there's a lot of factors to think about with martin nesting. And we have a question here. So I monitor for nest boxes in eastern martins, and the eggs you showed seem more almond shaped than the ones I observed. Could this be? I think it might be a camera angle thing. So what we should do, Jane, is get together and I can send you more photos of our nests where maybe they don't look quite so almond shaped. I think those particular ones they look kind of pointy because of the angle. But yeah, that'd be interesting to look into to compare. If we can get sort of a more true angle on the nest. So it's kind of hard because you're taking this camera. The only way I can really move it is by moving the pole itself, and they often are kind of looking at them on an angle coming in. Okay, is there any other questions I missed in here? Do you
There
see
is
any old?
one from Rick Tyler that are there any records of martins nesting in Oregon pipe cactus?
Not that I know of. That's a good question. I don't know if Gila woodpecker or Gila flicker nest in those. Ladderback might. I need to look into that. That's a good question. I'm not sure an Oregon pipe is quite big enough around to support a cavity for a Gila woodpecker or a gilded flicker. Um, that's a good question. I'll look into that. Oh,
Bill asked a question about predation,
predation.
and if that's an
Yes.
issue inside the cavities.
So that's a good question. So purple martins did not like it when we walk up with our pole and camera to see inside their nest. So that video I showed of the martins where it was like the life cycle, what the camera was seeing. I opened that video with martins swooping around as a group, calling, doing that was alarm calling they were doing. And that's a pretty familiar sound to Olya and myself now as we approach a nesting saguaro. And the nesting pair will do an alarm call, and their friends and comrades at nearby saguaros will come and help mob the threat to try to scare off the threat. It's very colonial, very cooperative behavior, which it's pretty relatively rare in birds. It's very interesting behavior, but they do like show up as like backup to support and try to chase you off. What's really interesting is we get used to that sound and sort of the normal intensity level that happens while we're at the saguaro, which can increase when we put the pole up near the actual nesting hole, and then they really kick it up a notch in terms of their fear. But I've sometimes heard them kick it up an even higher notch when I'm there. And then I'm like, what is going on? And I'll see like a falcon or something going by or a Cooper's hawk. The adults are very wary of aerial predators, things like like especially falcons, as well as things like Cooper's hawks. But they also do not like ravens. They do not like roadrunners, from what I've seen. When a roadrunner's near a saguaro, they'll freak out. They also, I'm sure, are wary of snakes. So anything that can get into that nesting cavity, like a snake, is going to be of big concern for them. But part of the reason they use these nesting cavities up on a fortress of thorns of a saguaro is it is relatively secure. We haven't seen much evidence of literal predation of the young in our nests. Nearly any time I've seen young that have perished seems to be heat related or drought related. But the adults, I'm sure, can get predated by things like falcons, which is why they really are not happy when even more unhappy than when I'm there with a pole poking in their cavity. They really don't like falcons. So predation is always a concern, but I think they've done a pretty good job mitigating that factor pretty well by being cavity nesters in a large thorny cactus and being excellent flyers as adults that can outmaneuver almost anything.
Jenny, I
Yes.
had, can you hear me?
Yes, Bill.
Oh, okay. I have this nest that's in Catalina foothills where I live, and this is the second year it's been used.
Oh, fantastic.
And the the first year I think they had four offspring. This year there were only two that I saw. I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm not there all the time, but I did notice one time. The reason I asked about predation is something that I read, but also I one time encountered there was a house sparrow, and it was going after this
Mm,
the male, and they were really going at it. I mean, and the male, the the purple martin is like four times the size of this sparrow, but the sparrow looked like he was getting the better of the fight.
interesting.
And So that's why I asked. When I looked this up, I mean, they mentioned sparrows. They also mentioned the starlings.
Starling. Yeah, that's interesting because that's a huge concern in eastern martins. So that because the eastern martin nest boxes and gourds can be in very urban and suburban settings because they tend to be in people's yards. That is a big concern. They get outcompeted sometimes by the house sparrows and the starlings who will, like the similar thing that was happening with bluebirds where they'll attack the nestlings and try to take the cavity. That definitely happens in the east, but the eastern martins are spring nesting and ours are summer nesting. So I think it's less of a problem here. I have seen starlings sort of hanging out near martin saguaros, but not going quite over there yet. And I have seen starlings take over a cavity once the martins have left, which is really interesting. But most of our martins nest far enough away from urban settings. They tend to prefer more wild habitat. They'll do suburban, they do not do urban nesting. They'll do kind of suburban into wild nesting. They're pretty intolerant of urbanization, our desert martins, which is very different from the eastern martins. So I haven't had too many observations of this happening with desert martins. So your observation is very interesting, but the martins are pretty darn aggressive. They will fight. So that'd be very interesting to learn more about that, Bill. And then we also have a good question here in the chat for Olya.
Yeah, so Rick is asking, did the finalist artificial nest boxes have the same thermal profile as real cactus? Did they do a good job of insulating? So the nest boxes didn't mimic the thermal buffering abilities of a real cavity in the saguaro exactly, but they did a really good job. And that's why we knew that we could use them and actually put them out and then the birds would use them safely. And to comment on predation, for nest boxes, we do have a predator guard on the bottom of the pole so that any climbing predators are not able to reach the nest boxes. And then we also, a spoiler about for my presentation, we haven't had any house sparrows or starlings use our nest boxes. So that is a good news there. Um, but yeah, good questions there, everybody. There's also a comment about martin activity at the Sweetwater Preserve this past summer. I think
Oh,
this
the
is
preserve. Yeah,
mhm,
not Sweetwater wetlands, the desert
right.
habitat of
Mhm.
the preserve. Yeah, that's a good area for them. So one thing I'm gonna promo like talk about a lot in my next more detailed talk is exactly where we found martins and where we think they are, but we haven't pinned down exact saguaros yet. And then I was talking to Danito about this. I am planning on doing a follow-up talk in April to talk about the project itself and how people can get involved and the detailed. And I have a lot of different ways that people can help with the larger Desert Purple Martin project. That's sort of suitable for all different, abilities, hiking ability, like different types of, very different types of ways to help. So whatever interests people, there's a way to get involved. And so we'll be doing that in April because the Martins return in May. So we'll be talking about that in terms of, and that's such a good lead in because that's such a thing where people will report on eBird or iNaturalist, oh, there's martins here, but I don't have any exact saguaros pinned. So a major way I need help is for people to go into these areas during breeding season, which is mid-May. Well, they start to hang out at saguaros mid-May through August and try to pin down those exact saguaros, which is not that easy. The birds are pretty wary, as we'll talk about. Okay, is there any?
Anyone else?
That is all the questions we have in the chat. Does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask a question? You're free to do that. Um, but yeah, just as a reminder, if we're waiting for any other questions to come in. So again, we recorded today's presentation. I'll be sending out an email to everyone a little later, probably be this evening. We do have a staff event here in a little bit, so it'll probably go out this evening. But it'll have a link to the YouTube channel where you'll be able to watch today's entire presentation, and then it will also have a link for you to sign up for the two follow-up presentations that Jenny and Olya are going to be doing in January. Jenny and I haven't nailed down that April event she was just talking about, but you'll have a chance to sign up for the two January events this evening in the email that I send out.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you after the holidays.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I will say I always like to ask as we're wrapping up, Uh, just everyone unmute yourself and thank Jenny and Olya. I appreciate all the info they provided, and I
And the
appreciate
Martins.
y'all for being here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
wonderful.
you.
You're a great
Wonderful.
audience.
Thank you.
Good job.
Hap-
Very.
Happy
Thank
Thanksgiving.
you.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you for
Thank you.
coming.
Wonderful talk.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for being here, and we hope you can join us on our next virtual event. We've got one coming up on December the 2nd. For you local Tucsonans or anybody in Southeast Arizona, it's a pretty cool opportunity. We've partnered with Cuenca Los Ojos to help them out with their Christmas bird count. It's down in northern Sonora, just a couple of miles south of the border. But it's an underbirded area and a spot that we don't get a chance to get into very often. So look for more information on that as well. So again, thank you all so much for being here, and a huge thank you to Jenny and Olya for an incredible presentation today. Thank you all so much.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.